Hi, my name is Rachel Smith, and I've been doing talks on how do we find our wholesome humanness for a very long time, for over a decade, and teaching a method that has been researched and I've held many groups for about 17 years now, 16, 17 years. And this method is the practice around how. And my talk has just shifted on its head recently. I don't think it's possible for us to find our wholesome humanness and deepen our connection with each other whilst the system remains as it is and has been for hundreds of years. Wholehearted people get burnt and rejected on repeat. I am such a person, and I want to show up inviting people to be very careful of living in the life, this life, with their hearts leading, with suspending judgments and really allowing ourselves to become more enlightened and living in the world in a different way, with more love and joy and blah blah, like the gurus have been telling us for a long time. Those who live with self-awareness, with open hearts and open minds, with being in the now, stepping into the mystery, which people do when they now go on like microdosing on mushrooms and go on these very popular medicine journeys. Those people get rejected. And people who operate from love and who really dare to stand in their truth, live authentically, are so often misunderstood, are very often dismissed, and mostly hurt. And I can speak from experience. In the 90s, I read all the self-help books that suddenly surged the market. I watched all the podcasts and I got very involved in listening to people telling me to be more vulnerable, just to stop being how we used to, and shift to become enlightened and self-aware. It was the time of the yogis and the gurus and the modern hippies. And I did it all until I realized it was through the dark that I found the light. So I had to get gritty. And as I was studying art therapy for 7 years, I did a lot of gritty, dark work. And I realized that this is the only way to becoming enlightened, was to really check in with my imperfections and my grit. So here really lies the paradox. In this rejection of trying to be a more enlightened human, lies the doorway to wholesomeness and wholeness. So it's a really tricky practice. So my favorite, I went last night to a Rumi evening where I learned how to dance like a whirling dervisher, and we spoke a lot around the 13th century poet and philosopher and mystic and incredible human Rumi, who shared so much wisdom. And his favorite saying, my favorite saying of his, is, in between wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. Let us meet there. A field where we suspend judgments of ourselves and judgments of others, and we really embrace the fullness of what it's like to be a human. And it really starts with suspending judgments. That's the radical act. And I've created guidelines around this and taught many people, and facilitated many groups for 16 years, practicing this way of being. So we step into this field of divine and mystery and enlightenment and amazingness. So we become more wholesome. But to meet in that field requires something truly radical. And that's the courage to be imperfect. Imperfect. What an interesting word. Courage is an interesting word. It doesn't mean fearless. It means from the heart. Core, in its essence, means heart. So I love like rage from the heart. That's courage. It's way beyond being brave. But the system that we live in, the education system, the corporate system, the whole system that we live in, does not allow us to suspend judgments or be imperfect. Definitely not. We live in a system that celebrates being competitive with each other, winning awards, and we just want to climb that ladder and become the most perfect and the most successful person in the eyes of the current system. So, I mean, when I talk about being courageous, I practice this. I used to listen to Brené Brown a lot when she first came out, saying, "Be vulnerable, be courageous." And I was like, I'm going to practice this. And when I put my mind to something, my heart to something, I do it. So I started living messy and showing up in a very messy way. And I was young, and I kept on getting burnt. But I started to get to know who I was, and I realized I'm much more dark than light. And then I started to question all of that. But we cannot live like the gurus teach us to. It sounds great, but it's impossible. I've really been trying this on repeat, and it feels like I need to warn you, which sounds ridiculous and quite egotistical, but I really feel like I need to warn you at this point that the system that we live in tells us that we're not enough. We're not successful enough. We're not attractive enough, and we're not worthy enough. And so the gurus and the system sets us up for failure. It pressures us to perform and be right and to compete against our buddies and to conform. It really rewards us for hiding our vulnerabilities, for hiding our truths, for hiding who we really are, and tells us to fit in. Or, which many of us know that saying, but it's the truth. I remember when I went to pick my children up at their former private all-girls school, and I went in my very floaty, silky, beautiful kaftan, and this huddle of moms in their gym gear at the gate said, or one of them, and I remember it so clearly, and she said, "Rachel, only you can pull that off." And I kind of cocked my head on the side and said, "Thank you." Okay. And I knew it was basically saying, "You're very different to us. You don't fit in." And then I took my children out of that school, and they went to an incredible school called Cedar House, where you can show up how you need to be. So the system is shifting, but not fast enough for people to live vulnerably. And if we don't live vulnerably, we lose connection, not just with ourselves, but with others. And so since COVID, we've been like fighting to try and fit in, but we can't. So my question today is like, how do we reclaim our connection? And I think the only way is through compassion for ourselves. Well, first of all, hang on, let's just feel that word, compassion. It's like passion for ourselves. It's so interesting. Passion for me, deep compassion for all that we go through and all that we are going through and all that we are going to go through. Life is hard. We live we are the only one, actually. We are the only being that shows up in this world wanting to be perfect. The tree doesn't want to be perfect. The seed certainly isn't. It has to go through this grit and dark, and then shoots out to this tree that breaks in the winds, but it doesn't stay there. It just reforms itself. And the tree next door doesn't show up and say, I'm perfect and you're not perfect. This thing that sapiens have around being perfect is bizarre and sad. And this competition we have together and this comparison is killing us. So deepening compassion every time we have a self-judgment, and we have them so naturally. We have thousands a day. We have these critics in our mind that show up all the time and say we're wrong or not worthy constantly. So deepening our compassion, I think that is the only thing we can practice right now, whilst the system is shifting. The system is our container. It's this big, intense machine that will take generations to shift. So whilst we cannot be in it authentically, then let us just have deep compassion for ourselves, because then possibly in the near future, as it arrives, we have compassion for others. And then we find beautiful connections every now and again. And for sure, we have these tender connections with few people in our lives, but we need to shift as a whole humanness. All of us need to shift. The whole of the world needs to shift at this time. Yes, one person at a time. So to wrap up, true connection is really born from authenticity. It's not about being like, who do we think we should be for the world? It's about showing up who we are fully, warts and all. That's what they're saying. And really, when we show up as our true selves, we invite others to do so. But in saying that, I've been doing that for a while, and only recently have I been rejected. When people are with me, it's a bit like moths to a flame. They get super excited because I live very authentically, irrespective of being burnt regularly. And people thrive off that unusual, unique energy. And then there's a point, and they literally, when I was seeing someone last year, they literally loved it for like 8 months, and then suddenly went, flipping heck, I can't actually be this vulnerable. It's exhausting. Like, that's literally the words that were spoken. Every year, I can tell stories around how I've been rejected for being authentic. But I've done it for so many years and it seems like a mission or something. And I'm not saying this with ego. I cannot shift. I cannot unknow what I know. So I'm just going to keep on going. And I just have very few friends and very few people that accept me for showing up in my wild self. I remember a boyfriend about 4 years ago said, I can't do this anymore, Rachel. It was about a year. It's like, you're just too airy fairy for me. And I was like, I was waiting for this conversation, but what do you mean by airy fairy? And it's because it's like I'm tripping on mushrooms all day. And my deepest authentic self is joy. And when that gets mirrored to the world, I get rejected. So this really is a be careful. I wanted to say warning, but that doesn't sound kind. So just a little message of like, be careful on this journey of becoming enlightened. First of all, I will never be enlightened. I will always be imperfect, and I love my grit and my imperfections. I'll never be enlightened because in my last breath that I will take, I will be learning. So I'm enlightening all the time. I'm being enlightened all the time. I will never become enlightened full stop, because I'm human and I'm messy and I'm gritty and I'm dark, and we all are. And if you think you just pure light and joy, there's something that's going to happen. That also sounds like a warning, but it's not. It's like, we got to go to our dark. We got to go to our grief. Grief, that's a big topic. Yeah. So I've always said that the 4 things to becoming a wholesome human are suspending judgment of yourself and others, to find that deeper connection, to have the courage to be imperfect and show up as not perfect, say apologizing when you need to say sorry, and just being gritty and imperfect, to practice compassion for yourself and for others. Oh, that's one of the most beautiful ones. And to be authentic, show up how you need to be, not what the world thinks. But being these ways, that's not English, practicing these ways into becoming a wholesome human will not shield us from risk and pain. So the question that I leave you with is, are you willing to shift together with being rejected in order for this system that contains us all to start reshaping itself? If you want to chat more about this, please do. And I'm sending you all love.